Hey everybody, John, you're here, Maryland K-12. I want to talk a little bit about school discipline. Got a nice article out, got a lot more detail on it. It's on my website, Maryland K-12. If you want to take a look, give it a shot. But here's basically the premise of the whole article if you want the condensed version. School systems have, we're talking about school student discipline, one of all of our favorite topics. People always ask me, are the schools out of control? It depends on what your standards are. I've seen some teachers that have complete chaos going on in their room, but they're perfectly fine with it. They love it and everything's okay. And I've seen some teachers where, you can hear a pin drop, and if one kid whispers, they're going, these kids are out of control, and everywhere in between. So it's hard to say. But anyway, what school systems do is this. They have all of their handbooks. They all have a behavior handbook. They all have, the student code of conduct and whatnot. And it all says, there are usually categories or levels of offense. Categories, levels, tiers, whatever you want. Groups, group 1. When I was in BCPS, it was, you had category 1, 2, and 3. Category 1 were the serious stuff, but not terribly serious. Generally might get suspended for it. Foul language, smoking, insubordination, that kind of stuff. And then you get into category 2, where the threats and that sort of thing. And then finally there's the category 3, which are the big ones, the weapons, the drugs, the attacks on other people and all that. What they have done is they've taken some of these lower categories and they bumped them up. It used to be the bullying and harassing types of things were usually in like category 1 and 2, and they pushed them up to levels 2 and 3. I'm saying 2 and 3. It could be tier, it could be 1 through 5. Every county has its own little system. But they're taking what used to be a lesser one in the wave of all this conservatism across the United States, where we're back to basics. We're not putting up with this garbage. We're going to suspend these kids, and you're getting a lot of that from the feds. Like it or not, it's there. So then they say, okay, we're going to start doing away with these things at the lower level, and we're going to make them higher level offenses, especially threats. Making threats to the school system, since the school shootings, there's all the swatting that's going on today. As a matter of fact, there was a thing about alphabetical swatting. Look that up, you get a chance. Alphabetical swatting. Anyway, when they're going through all this stuff, the school systems are bumping up these categories from what used to be maybe a level 1 or tier 1 to higher 2 and 3. And what happens is all of a sudden they look and they go, oh, we've had a huge reduction of levels 1 and 2 offenses, and they start championing that. So you hear things like, yay, Montgomery County, we've had so many fewer incidents of behavioral problems. Yes and no, and then they get bumped up. So basically then the higher ones, they tend to go up a little bit. And then they say, but we're having more reporting of weapons and things of that nature. So they're just kind of shuffling things around. I always believe that if you have SROs in school, you are absolutely going to have more incidents reported. So you have to use, if you were to ask teachers, is the behavior of kids getting any better? There's two types of data when it comes to this stuff. There's quantitative data, which are the actual data in the computers, if you will. Then there's qualitative data, where let's talk to some people and see what they say. Based on some of the things I've seen and heard from teachers on various YouTube channels and over the internet, and some of my own personal discussions with them, it looks, to say that we're having this great reduction is not always, something doesn't quite pass the smell test. And then another thing they do is this: they implement these things like PBIS, or what's called conscious discipline, etc. And all it is this whole new framework of all these different types of ways of documenting this behavior and all that, and it takes it out of the system from the administrator, and then the students, and then all of a sudden they look and go, oh, we've had a 50% reduction in office referrals because of this. Well, in many of those systems, PBIS, consciousness, that's because the system doesn't use office referrals. They have the teachers handling a lot more of that stuff in the classrooms themselves. So anyway, it becomes hard to actually with some real scientific certainty say whether behaviors and student discipline is getting better. There's all these parts to it, but the qualitative part is just as important as the quantitative part. So pay attention to the stakeholder surveys, which every jurisdiction should be doing, and make sure you pay attention to what the teachers are actually saying, because that has a lot to do with it as well. Anyway, I hope this, but schools, that's kind of how they juggle the numbers. They're not necessarily trying to be deceitful. That's what they do. The feds say we need more serious we need to make these offenses more serious and bump them up to higher levels, because so they school systems, okay, fine, they do it. They move them up. Then what happens is you see a fewer of them at the lower level, and they go, hey, look what. But then the higher levels, they're increasing. Look at my article. Got a little more detail on that, particularly in Baltimore and Montgomery County. I used those as examples. Anyway, I hope this helps. Thanks. Have a great day.